I'm sure it is. I'd like to say good evening to everyone, and it's good to have you guys out. And we did have our charge conference earlier, and I'm glad all that's over with. That's a lot of paperwork and a lot of stuff gathering up, and I'm so glad it's done with. So now if I can just get this next 6-page paper route for this class I'm taking, I'd be in real good shape. But I also wanted to mention to the church, we have 5 Sundays in this month, and I thought maybe we'd do something a little different on the 5th Sunday night. So I'm looking at a couple of different things maybe doing, but I have invited, I don't know how many of y'all have heard, you're talking about John going to listen to Brian preach. I don't know if y'all have ever heard him preach.
I have. Good.
I'm telling you what, he's really good. I've heard him several times in the past, and when I was singing, going out a lot, we would be at the same lot of the revivals, and then he would go eat out with us afterwards. And I got to know the young man pretty well, but he's going to be preaching for us on the 5th Sunday night. So I don't know, thought about maybe trying to find something else for us to do, but I know he will be here for our 5th Sunday night to preach.
When he was still in high school.
Yes, he was still in high school.
Yeah, that's I heard him.
Marianne gets graduated with Jerry and Cora, graduated at the same time, and he got out to preach.
Yeah, I remember that too. I was there too.
Yeah.
And I remember that as well. But he's going to be here for that night for us, and then on I think it's the first Sunday night. Trying to get somebody else, trying to get Timmy Young to come preach for us. He couldn't make it that night, but I think he's going to be here maybe the next Sunday. I'll have to check the date, but I'll let you know. I think we may have 2 Sunday nights in a row. We'll have some people into preaching, and that's good. We need to hear some from some other people. But Timmy, we know him very well, and he used to come here some before he started pastoring, and love to hear him preach as well. So be in prayer about that and those fellows, and we'll see what we can get into with them.
He's got 2 or 3 kids now. I don't remember how many he adopted.
Yeah, I know he adopted some kids, yes.
How many?
Psalms 23 tonight is what we pulled out of our box back there in the back. It's a very short Psalms. It is something that we all... It's probably one of the most quoted or the most recognizable passage in the whole Bible, really. You probably see it more on plaques and posters and shirts than you do anything else. And I typically do not do this, but I went online and found me an outline of some stuff because I don't usually use any notes at all. I'd rather not use notes, but this being so short and so familiar, I wanted to find something that would help me to, maybe all of us, to bring something a little different to this, maybe something a little new out to us and look at it. So the 23rd Psalm is, of course, written by David. And if you read a lot of David's Psalms, he wrote them when he was in trouble, or he was calling out to the Lord for help for something. But in this one, it would seem as if, to me, and the Bible doesn't say, or any commentary that I can read says when he wrote it, but it seems as if he may have been a little older when he probably wrote this. And maybe looking back over his life and thinking of how many times the Lord has watched over him and protected him through all that he did. So he wrote this psalm out to them. And that was just my thinking that I had on it was he wrote it in thanks. And the little outline I had that I found, it talked about 3 things that we can pick up out of this psalm. The first one, it says the Lord as our shepherd status. And we all know that when it starts out, he said, the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want. I shall not want. Well, we may talk about that here in just a minute. It says, the Lord is my shepherd. And the thing about the shepherd as a theme, you can see it a lot throughout the Bible. Even in the Old Testament, the New Testament, there are several places that it brings out. And David thought of God, the same God of Israel, the same God. You know, they didn't have the New Testament. Most of them didn't have copies of the Old Testament because they were wrote out by scribes. And so they didn't have it. So the Word of God was precious to them. But David knew the Lord. He said it was a man after his own heart, is what the Lord said about David. And as we think through this relationship that he had with God, David was looking back and he used the analysis of the shepherd and the sheep. Now, when he is saying that he's the shepherd, and it's used throughout the Bible, and there's some scriptures here that I'm not going to go through all of them that they brought out that talks about the shepherd, but even back as far as Genesis. In Genesis here, in chapter 49 and verse 24, he tells us that the Lord is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. And we know the stone or the rock that he built, he even said Peter was the rock that he built his church upon. So we know the rock is something that is very sturdy, very solid. It's not very easily moved. So when he's talking about this here, and then even up in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11, he tells us that the Lord says that he will feed his flock like a shepherd, and he will gather the lambs with his arms. And when I read that, to me, and I can remember, I've just seen it so often, we have seen the pictorial of Jesus carrying the lamb upon his shoulders and his back. And they do that a lot with the young sheep. I don't know a whole lot about sheep. We did raise a few of them for the girls for the ag fair, but some of the things that I read about sheep is the shepherd would do that with the new lambs. He will put the new lambs upon his shoulders, and he will carry them until they get used to the sound of his voice, or they get to know who he is. So that way when he sets them down, when they can walk, then they will follow him. Now, if they have a lamb that misbehaves, and I know this sounds pretty cruel, but they would sometimes hit them hard enough that they may break a leg. And that way so the lamb wouldn't run off and get into trouble, but then the shepherd would carry the lamb on his shoulders until he was healed. That way the lamb would get used to his voice. They know who he is. And I was thinking about, aren't we like that sometimes? I think of when we first got saved, how you seem like you're walking on the cloud and nothing seems to bother you, and you want to tell everybody about Jesus and about what God sent his son, and we go on about that. And I think that's when he has put us on his shoulders and he carries us for a little while till we get used to who he is, because he knows as soon as he sets us down or lets go of us, there's trouble coming our way. And I think he does that sometimes so that we will learn who he is when we first come into the fold. But then sometimes we get into a little bit of trouble and we stray away from him. So he's got to maybe, as a dad used to tell us, he would fine-tune us a little bit. So there's little lambs so they would get used and get back to where they needed to be. But David was using this analysis of the shepherd. And I'm going to jump over into John. Even in the New Testament, Jesus says this, that I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. You see, when a shepherd's out there with the sheep, the one that owns the sheep, they know that they have to take care of the sheep. That's how their family make their living. A lot of them, from the wool and from the meat and selling them also as sacrifices and the other things they did. That's how they made their money. So they did not want any harm to come to their sheep. So they would protect them, even if standing between them and whoever. Remember David when he talked about when the bear came after, he protected him and he killed the bear? And then he tells the story of when the lion came, that he killed the lion to protect it. Now, and the Bible also tells us that if the hireling is guarding the sheep, they run because they're not as nearly invested into them as they are the ones that would own them. But he says here that Jesus is speaking, and John, he says that the shepherd gives his life for the sheep, and that's exactly what he did. To protect all of us and have a way for us to get by, he gave his very life. John chapter 10 goes on and says in verse 14, it says, I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and am known of mine. I want to tell you about the sheep that we have. We used to raise those, and Sarah used to go up and she would tend to those lambs every day. And we would take them out of the pen we had them in. We kept them in the pen at night. And she would go up there sometime. We had big cinder blocks we would tie ropes to and put them on them. And them sheep, Sarah would go up there and she could sit down in the grass, and they would come over and they'd lay down by her. Because she was the one that fed them. She was the one that took care of them. And they knew when she come up, now if I go up through the yard, they'd run from me. Because I didn't feed them. I said, if I'm buying them, you're going to take care of them. Now, don't ask Patsy. Patsy fed them a lot. But now, they knew Sarah when she would come out there and sit down. They would just come right over by her and sit down. And that's the way the shepherd would do with the lambs. He would always take care of them. And they know his voice, and they know who he is. I have heard him talk about the lambs back in that time, the sheep, that they would drive them into a marketplace sometimes, and there may be 2 or 3 herds that would all be put into the same pen. And they would be herded into those pens, and the different shepherd would go do whatever business it was they needed to do. But when they come back, they can open up the door, and they would whistle and holler, and their lambs only, and only their lambs would come out after. Because they know the voice of their shepherd. They will follow him wherever he goes. Now, you can't drive a lamb anywhere. I know Jim and them has those cows over there. With cows, you can usually herd them, push them a little bit, and you cannot push a lamb into anything. You have to lead them, and if they trust you, they'll follow you. One time we got a couple of lambs, and the very first night we had them, they got out of the pen. They wasn't used to any of us. We chased them things, I don't know how long, and had to get Derek and a bunch of other people come and help us chase them things. Could not catch them things. Until Sarah finally, they chased around enough, she got a bucket and shook it with some feed, and they finally come after the feed, and we put them back in the pen. Well, you can't drive them anywhere, but you can lead them. And that's the same thing that Jesus did for us. That Spirit that he sent after he ascended back to the Father, that Spirit is what guides us today. We know his voice. And as Rick was saying in a little testimony that he gave, it's the little small still voices that we need to listen to. Because sometimes that's the way he talks. It's not a big blizzard. It's not a big, the winds. It's not the thunder. It's not sometimes it's that little still small voice. Hebrews says that Jesus was the great shepherd of the sheep. 1 Peter chapter 2 says that for ye were as sheep going astray, but are now returned into the shepherd and the bishop of our souls. And later on, Peter also says that, and when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. Now, there's a lot of other scriptures about the lamb and the shepherd, but I thought those were pretty good ones for us to keep in mind and remember that we all have that. Now, see, when he says that the Lord is my shepherd, I think David was talking about that he had a personal sense of who God was. He had a personal relationship. The Lord is my shepherd. For David, the fact that the shepherd would take care of his sheep like they do now, he wanted to boast about that he knew him. Now, in Jesus' time, whoever was, and even in all the biblical times, the shepherd was the lowest of the low jobs that you could have. The ones that tended to the sheep, of course, they smelt like the sheep. So most people didn't want to associate with them, didn't want them to be around because they were always muddy and dirty, and they were out in the fields. You know, they didn't come home in the evenings and get into the houses and you know, could stay dry no matter what the weather was. They were out with the sheep. So it usually went to the youngest son. And David knew what it meant to be a sheep because he was a shepherd. That's where he was when Samuel came up looking into the house of Jesse and said, you know, I'm here to anoint someone. Who is it that, and then as they all come by, and it was that ruddy boy out taking care of the sheep. I shall not want. What does he mean, I shall not want? Yeah, I think that the thing that this outline has, it says that it means all my needs are supplied by the Lord, my shepherd. And I was thinking when I also thought of that, if we're content with what the Lord gives, we usually don't ask for more than what we need either. If we're truly in tune with God, and God knows what our needs is, He's going to take care of our needs, so our needs will be fulfilled. Then he goes on and says, what about the shepherd's substance? It says that he made him to lie down in green pastures, and he leadeth me beside the still waters. He makes me to lie down. You know, when you are in harmony with God and you're at peace with God, when you lay down at night, you can rest. And boy, I think we all know, at least I know, when I am taking a whipping from the Lord for something that I did or something that I didn't do that I should have, boy, when you got that whipping going on, you can't sleep and there is no rest. But when you have that in tune with God, and you know He's your shepherd, He's looking over you, boy, you sure can sleep. I think sometimes a sheep, though, if you pay attention to a sheep and watch them, and they don't always know what they need. It's up to a lot of times to the shepherd to steer the lambs to where they need to be and what they need. And the Lord's like that with us, I think, a lot. There's a lot of times that we think we know what we need and we pray for something and we don't get it, we get aggravated, but the Lord always has something just a little bit better for us. If we'll just be patient and wait. He takes us to where we need. Because He says here to lie down in green pastures. Now, the shepherd always knew the good places to go for the sheep to rest. He knew where there was a lot of times at night they would take him into places where they made put rocks around like a pen, and he would put the lambs in there and the sheep inside there, and in the doorway that went in and out, that is where the shepherd laid. So that if anybody tried to come into the sheep, they had to go through him. Didn't Jesus say that He was the door? Isn't that something? Jesus said that He was the door. He was the way, the truth, and the life. That no man entered to the Father but through Him. He's the one that's sitting in the door to try to keep us all safe from where we're going. You know, when David was writing this, and I went back and found this. I used this in a message a long time ago about sheep. And I wanted to put this in there. And this guy that wrote this book, I found it again, was Philip Keller. And he wrote a book called The Shepherds Looked at Psalms 23. And in it, he noted in there that there was about 5 things, well, 4 things, 4 conditions that needed to be met before a sheep was content. 4 things that needed to be met. Because they are timid, they needed a good place to lie down where they wasn't afraid. You see, a sheep will not lay down if it's afraid. They don't have any natural defenses. They can't bite. They can kick a little bit, but they don't hurt. There's no way they can defend themselves against an enemy. So if they are, if they were afraid, they won't lie down. The next one I have here is because they are a social animal, they will not lie down if there is friction among the sheep. Now, I did not know that they was a social animal when we first bought our sheep. The first one we bought one sheep. That thing would holler and carry on all the time. It made all kinds of noise up there in the pen. And the only time it was happy was when we was out in the yard and it could see one of us. It would quit carrying on. So we found out after that when we got sheep, you get two of them. Because they had each other to keep company. But a sheep, if there is something going on within the flock, even with a few sheep, the whole herd of them won't settle down.
They'll come together. If something's wrong, sheep will, if one of them makes a noise and thinks something's wrong, they all come together. That's about like church people. When something's wrong, we all come together and pray about it. That's the way sheep are. They stick together.
They are. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. It's kind of like a family. Now, we may bicker among ourselves sometimes, but don't let anybody outside say anything about our family. We may, but when it comes time to get together, we get together, don't we? Also, if flies or other pestilence trouble them, they will not lie down. You see, the sheep are very timid, as we just talked about. The conditions have got to be just right. And finally, it says sheep are very anxious about food or hunger. They will not lie down if they're hungry. So if we think about this, the shepherd has to know exactly what he's doing. He has to be able to deal with the fears of them. They have to be able to take care of any friction that may be going on within the herd itself. If there's any flies or famine bothering them, they know how to take care of it. So the point of it is they know exactly where the lambs need to be to have water, when they need food, and when they need the green meadows to lie down. So that's when he says here that he to lie down in the green pastures. It has to be exactly right before the sheep will lie down. So I think when we look at that and apply it to our own selves, the Lord only wants the very best for us. He knows where we need to be. Now our problem sometimes is we don't want to be where He wants us to be. Sometimes we get out and we get a little friction going on, or we get a little hunger for something, or we have some flies or something out there that's bothering us, people, the old adversary, and we don't go where the shepherd is leading us. If we get away from that stuff, we could have that peace and can lie down in the green pastures. The second point that they brought out in this study was the Lord as our shepherd leads. The Lord as our shepherd leads. He says here that He restores my soul. He lead me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. He restoreth my soul. See, David was many times through reading him and reading the Psalms, we see that he was troubled, even in his soul. You know, there was a lot of times he didn't do what the Lord wanted him to do. There's a lot of times he got in trouble, and he even prayed for the Lord to restore my salvation. He knew when he did wrong, and he knew that he needed to get back to where the Lord led, to restore his soul. Now, to think of the shepherd and the sheep again, David's soul needed to be restored from time to time, so he could find the green pastures and the still waters that they had. Now, the still waters, and I may have, that was another thing that I read one time, was a sheep, when they have to cross a stream or get water, they will not cross if the water's moving. if it's rapid or if it's making a noise. I think they would have a hard time with a lot of the streams we have around here. Our creeks move. They like the water to be still when they bend over to drink. Or if they have to cross it, they want it to be still because they are so timid, the water scares them. So he's talking about the still waters that they have. The still waters in our life, folks, it's a lot easier when we're following after the Lord and doing what He wants us to do and being where He wants us to be. We can rest so much easier. But talking about restoring his soul, but what about He leadeth me? See, the shepherd was the guide. The shepherd was the one who took the sheep. You see, the sheep didn't know what they wanted, that they needed the green pastures, or they didn't know that they needed the still waters, or they didn't know a lot of the stuff, but the shepherd knew exactly what they needed. See, likewise, our Lord, not only did He steer David into the places that he needs, but He also guides us right where we need to be. Now, I've heard a lot of people talk about, boy, I should have been born in a different time. You know, they like the old days or they like something else and all this stuff. Folks, we are right where we need to be because the Lord has put us here at this exact time. This exact place. He has put us here for a reason. Now, a lot of the times it's up to us in prayer and study to figure out what is it the Lord has put us here to do. And I always say that when you figure that out, that's the easy part. The hard part is doing what He has for us to do. Folks, it is a whole lot easier for me to sit back there and let somebody else teach this, or let somebody else preach, or somebody else go visit. It's a whole lot easier to do it that way, but that's not what He has called me to do. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness. The leadership of the shepherd did not only comfort and restore David, it also guides the sheep into the righteousness, what God would have for us to do. It is a moral aspect to this, is what he's getting at. The shepherd leads us in the paths of righteousness. He takes us to the right place at exactly the right time, right when we need to be there. For His name's sake. For His name's sake. See, the shepherd guides the sheep with the main view for the credit and the glory of the shepherd's own name. Because, see, the shepherd, when he was taking care of those sheep, it's so important to him and his family because that's how they eat, that's how they live. It's important to that shepherd. So the shepherd wants only the best for his sheep, and that's the way God is with us. For His righteousness, for His name's sake, He is doing that because He wants the best for us. Then he goes on and says, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for Thou art with me, Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me. Now, this is the only one in this whole psalm that David wrote that has, a kind of a dark side or a negative side to it. But it's very beautifully written. And he talks about lying down in the green pastures and besides the still waters and the paths of righteousness. But then he talks about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. You see, there was a lot of times in David's life that he feared a lot of things. Same as we fear a lot of things. And one of one of our greatest fears that we have is a fear of death. Maybe not so much the act itself, but what is it? How is it going to happen? Or what am I going to have to go through? And we hear so much of how people, some of them will just go to sleep and never wake up, and we pray, thank the Lord for that. But some of them, goes through some terrible, terrible things before they die. And I think a lot of the times that's what our fear is what is it that we're going to have to go through in the actual death of itself. But see, David talks about this as a valley. Not a mountaintop or an open meadow, but a valley. You know, we have a lot of valleys around here, and it's a place that pushes people in. My father-in-law comes up every now and then. He used to. He does not like West Virginia at all because he says when he's here in this valley, it seems like he just can't breathe because it's just smothering him, the mountains. And because he's used to being able to look out and see for 6-7 miles in any direction you look because it's flat. Now, when I was down there, I didn't like it because I wanted to be back up in the mountains. But see, the mountains, they have the valleys and they compress you into it. And he's talking about the valley of the shadow of death. The shadow of death. You see, he's not talking about death itself. He's just talking about the shadow of it. You know, there's a lot of things that we have. We talk about shadows. Even in the New Testament, that's talked about how people wanted to just be in Peter's shadow because his shadow itself healed them. Peter didn't even have to get close to him and tell him or touch him. It's just his shadow passing by. But this is the shadow of death that cast towards David that he was thinking about. And in this valley of the shadow of death, facing what seemed to David as the ultimate defeat, of course, I think, in evil is death itself. And that's what David was really talking about in here. But he knew that if the shepherd was with him through that, he was not alone. No matter what we go through, we are not alone. The shepherd will be with us. Now we understand that the shadow is not a tangible thing of it as the death itself is, but you know, that there's so many times that I have read the 23rd Psalms and used it when we go visit people that's on their deathbed, or I've used it a lot of times in funerals, and even though we're talking about death, and it seems to comfort people. And the comfort is knowing that the shepherd will be with us. No matter what we have to go through, the shepherd will, and we are not going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death alone. I think that's so good. For thou art with me. He's right there with us. This talks about the presence of the shepherd. It kind of drives that fear away from us. And thou art with me, and I will fear no evil. This is the part that I always kind of didn't like very well. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The rod and the staff. Now see, the rod and the staff was instruments that the shepherd used for different things. He could use it as the rod or the staff, of course, is a walking stick, and it talks so many times about the staff, of course, and the rod was a little something that they would carry in their waistline. Some of them says that it's actually the same thing. I've heard different people talk about different ways, even in studying for this, different people back and forth. Was it one thing or two things? But I know a lot of them says that it was something that they wore around the waist. It was used to defend off those that would come in, and of course the staff was too. But it was also used to correct the lambs when they got out of line. Oh boy, that's the part I didn't like. To hear how they would sometimes maybe even break the legs of a lamb or do something like that to them to help correct them in line. You know, discipline is a way of is a security in itself, I guess. You know, we think about our kids and think about how we grow up, and I know I think personally myself, I think I got too many whippings growing up while I was growing up. But if you look back on it, you think that they only did it because they wanted to correct me on something. You only got one? I had a teacher one time that she told me that I walked in and put my hands on the desk and bent over and said, "Go ahead and give me a lick because I'm going to do something today to deserve it." That was Miss Neal. And she tells me that every time she sees me. She said, "Do you remember when?" I don't remember it, but she tells me. But I was an ornery boy. See, that was the difference. But when you see somebody, your kid's doing something, if we're out there playing in the road, you're going to correct them, tell them, get out of the road, maybe spank their bottoms a little bit. Say, don't go out there. You don't do it because you want to punish them. You do it because you want to correct them, and the Lord has to do us. That's times that.
My older sister and brother, Daddy was busy whipping them.
She just got out of the way and ducked. I know what she did.
I was thinking,
The last point that this guy that I read this, he said, we want to talk about the Lord as a host. David talks here about the Lord being a host. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Isn't that good to think about? That God is preparing a table for us. He is preparing a table because David still uses this metaphor of the valley of the shadow of death and the shepherd and all these other things. But he talks about how God, the host, is preparing a table for us.
Don't he bless us in the world season? I mean, he has me, I hope he sees.
Yeah.
By my fear, by the way that I treat people, and by what's inside, I hope that's one way, that's what that, I get, I mean, it means to me about how people can see it, and you know, they are our enemies in a way, because they work for death.
Yeah. See, David was using this analysis of a table. And a lot of times in tables in the Bible, it's talking about feast, but it's really talking about the great bounty. Even Sunday when I preached on the wedding and how he made the feast and he invited everyone to come in, you see, table represents a bounty that they have. The Lord has so much to give all of us. And he wants the best for us. And he prepares a place for us. I think that's foresight. He knows that at one time we're going to need, and he is preparing it ahead of time for us. What about before my enemy, in the presence of my enemy? Now, I've never been in the military, or I've never done any of that type of stuff that maybe some of you have. I know Rick has, and they will probably tell you that as they're doing drills or they're preparing, you don't take time to set out a big table and everybody sit around and have a big meal. Especially if you happen to be in time of war, you know they're usually not the very best conditions, and you just eat what they can give you. But can you imagine being in the midst of your enemies and the Lord making the table right in front of them for you to sit at? Because you can have that much peace if you trust in the Lord. If we turn all of our cares over to him, he will set a table in the presence of our enemy. In other words, we can relax enough that we can sit at his table and feast. Even with the world raging around us, we can have that peace. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Despite all the dangers that David was in, and we know how close he come to death, and even King Saul threw a spear at him one time and barely missed him, and all the other things that's going on. Here, even in the presence of all of his enemies, David is talking about the richness of the host, godly host that's having, that he will refresh him by anointing his head with oil. Just a refreshing. Now David, of course, Saul went out and he anointed David's head as the king when he was just a boy, but it's refreshing to be able to do that and have a cup that runneth over. Being blessed so much and having such abundance. I think that's what Greg was just talking about. Boy, our cup runneth over. There's a song, Drinking from a Saucer. Because my cup is overflowing. I haven't done that in a long time.
no, you haven't.
What about our blessing for the future? A blessing for a future. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow. See, the host cares so much that he is preparing not only a table for us, but through his goodness and his mercies that he is bestowing upon us. He has given us far above and beyond what we can even imagine. More than we can imagine. He'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. See, this psalm ends with a common assurance that we can enjoy the presence of the Lord forever. Isn't that good to think about? All that he has and he has given us. Well, I hope you got something out of this tonight. It's a short psalm, but I knew I couldn't do it on my own, so I had to go find an outline. And I don't usually do that, because I usually like just going through it. Anyone have anything else? You want to look to see if we have something yet? Yeah, let's see if there's another one out there that may be, may not.
You can't push sheep, you gotta be a leader.
Mm-hmm.
When we lived in Arizona, I think I told this before. Of course, back then you couldn't do it now. There was a bunch of sheep where we lived in a field.
Mm-hmm.
And they transported those sheep, they walked them from one field to the other, but they come to this intersection. And they just started milling around in a circle because the leader hadn't caught up with them yet.
Mm-hmm.
We was walking to school.
Yeah. Nothing in there. So, anybody have a book or something, a chapter or anything we want to look at next time? We was going through some of these in the New Testament. Where did we leave off? Yeah, I think 2 Thessalonians is where we left off. Let's go into 1 Timothy then next time. If no one has anything else you want to go through, this is the next book. And Timothy, this is a letter that Paul wrote to him, and it has a lot of really good advice for the church and the church leader. I read it every now and then for myself.
1 Timothy?
1 Timothy.